All right, we are recording. So today I'm really excited to have all of my professor friends back on to talk about the Olympics, the first week into the Olympics. But first, Jane couldn't make it last week to do a little introduction. So I wanted to hear what you are watching. Well, first of all, what's your lens into the Olympics? And yeah, your what do you teach?
Awesome. So my area, I'm a professor in recreation administration, and so recreation and sport are definitely adjacent. They go nicely together. But disability and sport are really my area of focus. But when it comes to the traditional Olympic Games, I'm really watching for a couple of things. I'm watching for the way that community is built around the sports, around competition. And specifically, the way that athletes are interacting with each other and the way that they're interacting with folks outside of the games, right? So the interactions that they're having with their peers and their coaches and their family members, and also the way that the community is embracing the athletes. So I'm looking at the traditional games from a community recreation, sort of like the tourism and the recreation community building sense. But I'm also super interested in gender equity in the games and the way that there's more. I feel like there's more. I didn't actually do the research on this, but I feel like there's more mixed gender competition opportunities in these games than I've seen in the past. So those are the kinds of things that I'm looking for as I'm watching. And then I'm definitely going to be watching the Paralympics more closely for opportunity of sport to elevate people's interests, passions, and desires, and also the way that sport is sometimes used to promote ableism as opposed to promote inclusion.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And that's actually perfect timing for Tony to come in to talk about that community aspect of like how the local community is either embracing or not embracing the athletes. So, what's been on your radar, Tony?
Well, certainly the protests of native Italians there, the left in the political world there has been raising concerns about the amount of money spent, particularly in that region on the Olympic Games and the failure of the youth to actually have jobs. And so you're getting sort of a youth movement out there who are trying to express this desire for reconfiguration of where the money goes, if you will. So you're getting some really outspoken criticism of the Italian government and its use of resources to fund the Olympics. There's also the environmental impacts that the local community has been really bringing to light there. It's not covered really at all in our mainstream press, but the forest conversion as a result of expansion, as well as the building of like ice hockey arenas, that what happens and what happened in the Torino games, and this was, I think, if you can correct me, someone might know, it was 2002 maybe? I'm trying to remember. It was
That
early
was
2000.
Salt Lake. 2002 was Salt Lake. So maybe it
Okay,
was six.
so maybe it was 6. What they did in the Torino games is they built practice facilities in these rural communities because they didn't have enough space to house all of the teams. So they were building these practice spaces that were millions of dollars, ice hockey arenas, mostly for ice sports. And then after the Olympics was done, these communities were left to actually maintain these buildings. They don't even have enough money for their schools there. And now they have to maintain these $1 million buildings that aren't going to be used by anybody. So, this is somewhat of a repeat of what happened in Torino. And we see this not necessarily being addressed. But there are two things about politics of the Olympics I want to talk about. Despite the IOC's efforts really to distance the Olympics from politics and their human rights responsibility, we're seeing clearly how Olympic sport really intersects with politics and culture, and it doesn't exist in isolation. So what's not being adequately covered, I think, in the mainstream press, the alt press is doing good. That's the Ukrainian skeleton racer. I don't know if folks have heard
Mhm,
about it, right?
mhm. With his helmet.
Harasevich, I think is his
Yep.
name, right? He's wearing the helmet featuring his fellow athletes who were killed by Russia. Straight up, right? But it's broken IOC rule around propaganda. I think it says no kind of demonstration or political, religious, or racial propaganda, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been interesting, their response, right? You can wear an armband with no text. And again, it's, the IOC itself has banned Russia. from all the sports, the nation states. It sort of creates a space for conversation, right? About what is political expression, right? And what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed at the Olympics. And then the second piece is, I think you all are familiar with, like the criticism of our athletes about ice. And that is, again, this is our president acting like a 2-year-old, right? You've got the skiers, Illis and Hess, really voicing their concerns about ice and the tensions. And then we've this bully president and draft dodger criticizing them and saying they're real losers and that they shouldn't have tried out for the team, right? It's really yeah, and that's his statement, right? And then you have the Great Britain skier who lives in the U.S., but he's a Great Britain skier. He actually received death threats after posting an image of ice. Following that, we have a really interesting piece where we have a curler. His name is Richard Ruhonen, and this is after these folks have gotten attacked. He comes out the other day and says, what's happening in Minnesota is wrong, and he's proud to be here, but he says we would be remiss if we didn't at least mention what's going on in Minnesota. So we see athletes responding to first the threats, and then what normally happens, right, is people they zip it because they don't want to get death threats. But we have this attempt by others of saying we're not going to be silenced by the brown shirts of the current administration, right? And they're speaking out, knowing that they're going to get attacked. So it's a real interesting coverage that I hope to see a little bit more of that discussion in the media. And I know it's on the lefty, the non-mainstream, but I don't know. So those are three things that are really, really interesting to see how they work themselves through the next few sessions.
I find the thoughtful and measured statements of concern from the U.S. athletes to be so complementary to their sportsmanship, to their commitment to Team USA, and to themselves as Americans, that it's hard to even imagine that the other side is jumping on that as saying that they're defacing or defaming the United States.
Losers.
I have not seen all of the statements, but the statements that I have seen were statements of profound concern.
Mm-hmm.
I'm proud to be
really
here.
Benign too. They haven't been really outrageous.
Right. That's what I'm saying. They've been so thoughtful and so well representing themselves as team members of Team USA.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so back to what you started out with, Tony, about the creation of these facilities. And I know that in some cases, I think some Olympics kind of do it differently in different places about thoughtfully creating an infrastructure. How can we turn the Olympic Village into future housing, or how can we turn this facility into a more permanent facility for continue to do sport development for the future generations of a location. And so, I guess what makes you guys think about when I say that?
Well, I lived in Salt Lake for many years, and I was there for the 2002 games. And so I was able to witness firsthand the building of the infrastructure for those games and the impact that it had on the community. Now, Salt Lake is not a small rural community, right? I mean, it's a city. And at the time, it was a booming in growth. It continues to be. But the Olympics came at a time of a huge upswing in growth in Salt Lake. And so all of those practice facilities that they put into communities where development was happening, right? So all this ice is there. Matter of fact, every time I go back to Salt Lake to ski, we go to a different ice arena to skate because there's so many of them. We'll go to the long track speed skating arena. We'll go, to various practice facilities where we were able to watch the Olympics, and now we'll go back and just skate at them, and they're always full. So in that case, with just the ice, with the ice arenas, it's clear to see that when they're put into a city that can support that infrastructure, it gives opportunity for growth. And it also created access to sport that kids might otherwise not have had the opportunity to access. It brought the cost of skating down because now there's less demand on the ice because it's everywhere, so they can't jack the price up, right? So it keeps the cost more affordable. And then also the infrastructure for the housing was really cool because it became housing for the University of Utah. So they stayed on the University of Utah campus, they built new dorms, and those dorms became part of the University of Utah. So it can be a benefit if the games are held in a space that can support that infrastructure. But a rural community, mountainous community can't.
Yeah, I think you speak well to this aspect of community input and transparency in the process. which the IOC is not really that helpful to local communities when it goes and develops their plans. We don't see that in countries like Italy and Rio de Janeiro and other places. In the affluent West, the US, we see a little bit more because they sort of have to, in a way. It is been reported at this. Oops, I got to take something out of the oven. It was reported in one of the newspapers, the Italian newspapers I read that there was certainly an infrastructural development that was beneficial, and that's roads. Certainly everyone like the road conditions in those rural areas, right? However, housing, other sorts of expenses that were not necessarily needed at that facility. And in terms of the, like, when they choose the site, right? There's other places that have those facilities there in Italy, and how that sort of process works, like the transparency there. And, we have Seth Black, or not, no, that was soccer. We have all the controversy around how to get the bid, right? So there's that potential, right? Really to develop that infrastructure and have a community benefit, right? But they got to get involved in and have access to those discussions early on. And I don't think, it's the case in this situation.
One of the things that I've talked with Era about, who's also in recreation administration in our department, is why don't they just have like a couple locations where they just do the Olympics every year rather than having to recreate it every 4 years or every two, every so often? Why is there not just like one place where the Olympics are? And so, yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I see the advantage in that because the facilities are established, but then also the disadvantages is that it doesn't give athletes one of the boons as an athlete is to be able to travel and see other places. And so if that's your home, like so say the US is one of those spots and maybe, say France is another one of those spots. Athletes from those communities don't have the opportunity then to travel in the same sort of ways and get to know the culture and spaces. I can say I've coached for the Special Olympics World Games, so very much similar to the Olympics and the Paralympics. It's on a 4-year rotational cycle to various spots around the world. And I was able to go to Ireland with my athletes and coach and meet coaches from around the world and get to know Ireland. And then I also got to coach in Nagano, Japan with the World Games. Uh, and I got to know Japan, right? So we went for a couple weeks beforehand, did a homestay, got to know the culture, and then jumped into games. And so there is an element from the athlete and tourism perspective where people get to know cultures of different places, and that would be lost. But also it can be an economic cost, but it can also be an economic boom for countries to host the Olympics. And so it would be creating more wealth in wealthy communities. So, I mean, I see both sides of that. I can see how, there are two sides.
Exactly, because I think, obviously it's good to have opportunities to be able to compete on your home turf. Like all the athletes from Italy right now, just you hear it in the stands, how excited everyone is about their home turf.
Mhm.
Then with the travel, then it makes it in terms of that accessibility, there are certain athletes who I think it was a skier from Kenya. There were supposed to be two athletes from Kenya, and one wasn't able to do it because of the cost of being able to get there, which then goes into what do countries actually do to support the athletes? And a lot of time, back to American athletes, a lot of American athletes, they have to pay taxes on their medals when they return. They're actually not really supported. A lot of them are they have to do so many other jobs just to be able to compete to represent their country, and their country is not really giving back as much. And so I know that that's different in different countries of how different countries actually support their athletes and being able to offset some of those travel costs, all of the equipment and everything, training, everything like that. And so I think, yeah, there's so many different, differences from country to country.
And the winter games are notoriously expensive. I mean,
Yep.
to be able to be an athlete competing in a winter sport, every aspect of it is expensive. I think the least expensive maybe would be cross country skiing, Nordic skiing, but even that's going to be expensive. And again, there's opportunity cost. You have to be able to live near a place that has these opportunities.
Which
Yeah,
then
this is
gives us more of a support for having the Olympics in more places, not just in a couple of centralized
Mhm.
places, because it creates maybe
Right.
some of those locations for people to get into it that they might not have had the opportunity
Mhm.
to.
Yeah, I go to the political economy of all this, right? The broadcasting dollars go somewhere, right? And some of that money needs to be given to athletes and athletes, the countries that don't have the economic abilities to really fund them to get to places. I've got a great example. I was the assistant lacrosse coach for the Italian national team, and we have World Games, and we had the team from Uganda come over because the sport is spreading all over. And they couldn't have made it without support from the lacrosse associations that helped put on the games. They were in Denver, so it was in like a core country, very expensive. My country, or the country I represented, to Italy, like I had to pay all of my costs. Right, the only thing that they paid for that I had covered was my room and board. We stayed at the University of Denver, right, and I was in a dorm room for 10 days. But they couldn't afford, the ticket, if you will, to pay all the coaches because they put that investment in their players. But this is where I think, when we take a look at balance sheets, I think if there's and this is the transparency about the Olympics, right? Finding ways to really allow for more inclusion and then allow for those countries that, need that assistance. As we know, there's countries that are in debt. The IMF has got structural adjustment programs against them. Their trade, they have no jobs for their youth, and it's still yet they're forced to put in millions of dollars and millions of dollars in these athletes and they don't have it. So yeah, it would be nice to have that cooperation, right? And hopefully there'll be some movement on some of that stuff. Yeah.
I want to switch gears real quick and ask you guys if you watched the border cross last night or yesterday. Did anyone
No,
see
I
border
was just
cross?
watching the women's half pipe. That was it. I
What
haven't seen
what
it.
was it? I'm sorry, Jayne.
Border cross. It might not have been yesterday. I watched it in the recap, so I'm not exactly sure if it was yesterday or the day before. Border cross.
What is
In
that?
border cross, they send off 4 snowboarders at the top of a run together at the same time, and then they compete for time to be the first 2 across the line.
Yes,
Those first 2 then advance.
I did see that.
I had so much fun watching Nick Baumgardner, who's an American, mustachio, the big mustache. And he's maybe, I think they said he was 40 or 44 years old, his 4th Olympic Games, and he was just exuding joy, every aspect of it. Even in the race where he didn't advance, he was still like, oh, darn it. I knew I had too much airtime, and he hugged the guys next to him and he was congratulating everyone. Oh my gosh. I mean, if you could capture the spirit of why all of this happens, I'm giving a big up to Nick Baumgardner for exemplifying what the games is all about. Wow. He just made my heart happy.
I saw that, Jayne. I think I was at Paul's Live from New York getting a piece of pizza with my kid, and I look up, he goes, Papa, the Olympics is on. And I walk over and I see this dude with this huge mustache, just like the grin here.
Yeah.
And all these like 18-year-olds. I'm like,
I know it. He
I'm
could
like,
be there.
is
He's
this
old enough to be their
like,
father.
it didn't switch, my sort of ageist brain went.
Yeah.
It was like, that's an old dude. What's he doing in this sport? And then he just took off. And he was, yeah, you're right. He was just super happy. And it was, yeah.
It was adorable. Yep. And then the other feel-good story of the men's border cross was there's 2 brothers from France. One was 17 and one was 19, and they're both competing. They both make it to the both made it to the semifinals, and then one advanced to the big finals and one advanced to the small finals, which I've never heard that term before, but the small finals was 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th place designation. And so these 2 boys, 17 and 19 years old, are competing against, and they had so much love for each other in the sport also. And then to see them competing with this 40-something-year-old man who's been in the games many times, it was lovely.
Yeah, you see it a lot in the summer games for skateboarding.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge part of skateboarding culture. Like at least in the women's competition, after every single run, they're all hugging each other, even though they're competing against each other. That vibe is just not there. And you saw the same thing last night, or I saw the same thing last night with the women's half pipe final, where Chloe Kim was like supposed to win her 3rd gold medal in a row. But then out of nowhere, my 17-year-old from South Korea, she fell hard on the first run. It was like, oh, she's maybe out. Like, the second run, it was like, actually, no, she's pulled herself out. Went down for the second run, third run, killed it, won the gold medal. And then at the end, they said Chloe Kim's family is from South Korea, and they found this other, like, young girl from South Korea, and they've brought her over to the United States to do training in the United States. And so even though they're competing, they're all really supporting each other, and all of the like intercontinental, like, ways of, like, you saw it in the ice skating too, figure skating, where they all had the same coach. Like, they're all training together in Canada.
And they spend so much time together. I mean,
Yeah.
they're traveling to various competitions. They're hanging out together there, and they're cheering each other on as they're getting better and better and coming up through sport. And so they are like, that's the community piece that I just love about sport, that it creates these interconnections. Now they have these international friends, and when they're no longer competing, they have, a different understanding of the world and how we all fit in it together. It's awesome.
Exactly. Yes, I love that. Tony, you wanna, add on or burst our bubble? I was just saying there, actually just showing the joy of the Olympic Village, and, I think that's what people are seeing, like, that's what a lot of my social media feed is right now, is, like,
Sorry.
Olympians in the Olympic Village talking with each other. Yeah, Tony, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, sitting for an hour and doing just traveling around and talking to all the Olympians there. Like I said, I was in the World Games here in Denver, and there were, 30 countries, and we all lived together. We had breakfast together. We did everything together. And you just sit down, like, it's not just the Team USA or the Team Italy table. It's like you just sit down and you just start talking to someone you're going to play next. And then you build that friendship. And then again, like you say, Jayne, you're over in Berlin and you're playing in a tournament and you see the same people, and it is a family. It is really, in each sport, there is that family dynamic. Even though you do have those competitions, there's some players like you don't want to sit next to, right? But overall, it's like that supportive culture of that particular sport, right? It's really prominent, and it's super cool.
Yeah, we got a weird. Do you hear that echo? There, it's gone now. I was saying earlier that I have been honored to be able to coach for the Special Olympics World Games, and along with the athletes building those relationships, I loved having the opportunity to build relationships with the coaches, like getting to know all of the other coaches from the world platform. Those were some of my favorite, all the coaches meetings where we would get together and talk about, like, how the game's running and what we can do to better support our athletes. And, how's the transportation working? Is the food okay? Like, just, the infrastructure of how, the races are important, but we're all living in this together. And so it's really an amazing community to be part of for everybody involved.
And when we think about what's the purpose of sport, and when you think about your own experience in sport, it wasn't necessarily the competitions that you really think about. You think about your relationship with your teammates, or like the social development that happens, your own progress, like your own fulfillment of goals. That's like the bigger aspect of sport that I think is kind of missing a lot of times when we hyperfixate on competition over just like the joy of sport.
It's that aspect. It's that community aspect, the skill development, the growth, and the competition. But the focus is on renewal and connection when you're talking solely recreation. But when you're talking competing at an elite level, then the primary focus ultimately is on competition. But still embedded in there, you can find those elements of recreation and community.
Yeah, I want to just echo a little bit of what Jayne said. There are games that you play with you are playing the two best teams, and then there are games that you're playing with a country that has maybe one very skilled player, and it's a new sport for them. And what you'll see like they're not going to run the score up. They're not gonna put in their first team and beat them and embarrass them, right? There's the competition piece, and then when there's the playing of other teams that we know, they're not their rivals. And again, from my experience playing the team like from Uganda, right? You're not gonna run the score up. You're actually gonna help them play while you're playing, right? So it's a little bit of both in these environments in some ways. I mean, the Olympics is super elevated, right? Like because of the investment, but I think there's a piece of that too. We saw a little bit of that in hockey. The U.S. has beaten, I think, Finland 5-1, or one of those teams. It's the third and they're not running into them, and they're not being aggressive where they could be. They've already won the game. They recognize like there's a whole community thing going on. And then also what's interesting too about at least that piece, like in hockey in the US, you don't shake hands until the end of the end of the series. They're shaking hands after every game. And that, like, again, I saw that yesterday, like, wow, that's like, that never happens, right? And everyone's hugging each other because they all know each other, even though they just got beat 5-1. It was nice to see that, right? To see that just playing, that sort of playing for the game and not necessarily for the winning. And that, it's hard. There's a tension there, the love of the sport versus we got to win all the time.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm sure I'll have this conversation with Roberto and Mike and Tani later on as well about, so a lot of times when they have there's one athlete from a certain country that's representing their entire country, and then they finish last. And then you see they make the clip, they make the video for NBC, Olympics.com. They're like, watch this person from Venezuela get last place, and look how everyone's so excited for them. And for some reason, it totally works on me. I'm like, I'm watching it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just so inspired, and this is just so great. But it's weird to think about how we view. I don't know. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? It's like the way that they highlight certain things.
The winning piece, right? You only honor and you get excited for winners, right? And losers suck, right? I mean, as our
Except for when we want to highlight them because they're like the first one from their country.
Yeah.
But that's part of that Olympic kind of feeling, that sense of competition, and that you're part of a greater culture, and it just feels so nice. But then I also know, and Tony, I want to hear what the definition of sports washing is, because I feel like I've been able to just exclude myself from all of the world's troubles for the last week and just hyperfixate on sport. So I don't know if that's the correct definition of sports washing, or what the definition of sports washing is, or how you're the sociologist perspective on that.
Yeah, the sports washing piece is. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. This is, again, it emerged first in sort of media as like a slogan, but it's now a theoretical concept, right? And that's where situations where sporting events, in a way, are over politicized to distract us from human rights concerns or failures of governments. So, it's sort of image making. You want to think about image making in the state. So we saw a lot during the World Cup in Saudi Arabia, right? Human rights abuses were sort of not discussed. And then they did discuss some of the changes. Oh, but women can drive. So you have now that made it. Now that they hosted a World Cup, now their country is not a pariah when it comes to human rights. So that is the sort of concept of sports washing. It's taken somewhat from the concept of greenwashing that we know with environmental issues, where corporations that are destroying the ecosystem will then tout themselves as being green when they do 0.1% of their product is environmentally sound. That's sort of the similar theoretical. It's got theoretical connections to that, if you will. So the sports washing, it's tough because it's almost, you can think about the Russian issue, the in Ukraine, right? Russia's going to use this as reverse sports washing, because they're going to say the IOC let them put a political statement on the Ukrainians' helmet, and then it's going to garner support in Russia, right? Help build up a regime, because now they're like, see, they're picking on us, and then it's not fair. So that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, I'll look about, we'll think about how that's going to play out, the sports washing in this. I'll do a little bit more digging for us in the next. I have to split. I'm so sorry. I have to go to class.
Yep. Go back to our students.
Thanks so much. It's good to talk with you all. See ya.
All right.
I'm curious, Whitney, what you think about this idea of mixed gender sports. So I looked up to see today how many different mixed gender sports there are in the Winter Olympics. And on top of the figure skating and the ice dancing, there is mixed doubles in curling. And then in the biathlon, there's a mixed relay. Skeleton, there's mixed relay. Border cross, there's a mixed competition, a mixed relay. And then let's see, in ski mountaineering, which I'm anxious to see that one. I don't even know what that sport is. That is a new sport. And there's a mixed competition. And then in ski jumping, a lot of these sports, though, they're really just taking two scores and bringing them together, right? So they're not competing against each other. Like there's no live actual time competing against each other. Instead, you're just taking scores and combining them. But with curling, okay, here's my question. Why do we even have gendered teams in curling? Is there a gender bias? Is there any way in which a male athlete is stronger or better at curling?
I think this is the exact same thing. And then when I was watching the mixed curling, the thing that stood out to me was it was always the female athlete who was doing the initial like
Mhm.
putting the stone forward, and then it was the man who was doing the big scrubbing part, and that felt like, all right, like I know
I mean,
that.
it's nice to watch a man with a broom in his hand, I'm gonna say.
Gosh, hilarious. But yeah, I was like, I don't know why that is the standard in the mixed doubles, because I know that when you
Yeah,
watch just
I
women's,
wonder though, like, so the point of the broom is to remove the bumps
right?
that have been set, that there's like pebbles, they call them
Yeah,
pebbles that are set on the ice. And so it may be that the weight of the person scrubbing, the weight and the strength may allow for greater friction. So in
maybe.
that case, maybe.
Yeah, yeah,
But I mean, I feel like I would love to see a sport. I would love to see a sport that says, put your four people forward, right? And let them be whoever you want them to be. Or like with ice dancing or with the pairs figure skating. Could it be two men who skate together? Could it be two women who skate together? I mean, like why does it have to be a man and a woman partnered in these sports?
exactly. It's and you make a good point that there's more of this Olympics than there ever have been before, and so it's like we're making improvements, and I would love to reconceptualize sport to like how can we make sport actually like it doesn't matter what gender you are, like what sports allow for that, like why is archery gendered,
Right.
why it's I don't know, it's hard because I think in some cases people could make the case that, having like a women's league allows more women to actually
Mhm.
compete. If you just have like if you only have enough resources for one sport, then just let everyone compete in that. And I also don't know how trans people fit into
Mhm.
the like dual
Right.
gender sport, like the pair kind of sports, and so that's something that I think about as well. It's like, all right, well, if a trans athlete was in here, like how would they fit in with that team event in the Summer Olympics? Like you were saying, the in the Winter Olympics, it seems like they're not like actively competing against each other, so there's not like a man and a woman like on the same trail together at the same time.
Mhm.
But in the Summer Olympics, they did one of the relays in swimming, the medley relay, where there's
Yeah.
yeah, like all the like butterfly, backstroke, breaststroke, freestyle. So you're doing all those 4 things, and so it was interesting to see how each country decided
Mhm.
to which athletes they decided to put forward. Do you want to put like a female breaststroker there or a
Yeah.
male breaststroker out there?
And
Would
that's
you
a
have
really good way to create equity. So you're gonna have a mixed relay and you can choose where you want. I think the biathlon was similar too. Like you could choose where you wanted this in the mixed biathlon.
right. Yeah, the order. And that actually, brings us perfectly over to the Paralympics and like, what does inclusion actually mean? Like, do you think that that would be a good idea to have a mixed relay with para athletes and the Olympic athletes?
Yes, I think that would be amazing. In the switching gears to the other major sport venue, to Special Olympics, they already have this. And even in the state of California, I think there's two, and there may be even more sport competitions where they're called unified sports, where athletes with and without disabilities are competing together. And so at the state of California level, swimming and track and field have unified sports competitions all the way up through going to state. And then in some states, they have like unified basketball, unified volleyball, where athletes with and without disabilities are equal team members. And it really creates an amazing opportunity for people to build respect and friendships. through sport. Yeah, it would be great to see it in the Paralympics or the traditional Olympic Games. And I mean, like there already are athletes with disabilities competing in the traditional Olympic Games. We can think back to the now infamous, if that's the right word, Oscar Pistorius. But his case created a lot of publicity around, or a lot of awareness to the right for athletes with disabilities to compete in the traditional games. But that said, there's plenty of athletes with, like, there was, what sport was I just watching? Someone's was is deaf in one ear, right? But that they're competing in the traditional game. So I think there's a lot of athletes who have disabilities that are competing in the traditional games. They're just not disabilities that are visible. And so, they're invisible disabilities. So we don't necessarily notice them. And unless media points them out, we wouldn't know.
Right. And that one of the things that people just make this assumption that the para athletes are like less athletic or something than the traditional Olympic athletes,
Mhm.
and which is not true. But then with the Oscar Pistorius case, it was like, well, actually, no, he has an unfair advantage, and it's like,
Right,
hold on, does he have a disadvantage or an advantage?
right.
You're trying to make both cases at the
Yeah,
same time.
yep.
And I think one of the things that I'm really excited about, especially with the Paralympic Games and like the development of more adaptive equipment, is actually like they might have like a really major advantage in sport based on new updates in equipment with, yeah, better.
Yeah, it is so tricky though to determine, like with Oscar's case, and then there's been other cases that have gone forward since Oscar too. I mean, you can look at the device itself. So you could look at his carbon fiber blade, his blades, to see what kind of propulsion they give him. But what you also have to factor in is the wear and tear on his body and the lack of muscular response through his foot, right? So he's only getting a muscular response to the where his limb difference occurs. And so, there's a whole another piece that's difficult to assess. And so with Oscar, I can't remember the exact details, but I think they determined that
It
maybe
was like
that,
at a certain point of the
yes, it
race,
was a certain
heart
point.
rate
Yeah.
his heart rate should have been different at that point of the
Mhm.
race. Yeah, because he doesn't have, the I don't know, the muscular fatigue in his lower extremities that another runner would have, I guess.
Yeah, and so I guess what they ended up, again, this was years ago now, but I feel like they ended up with a decision where it said in a race up to this length, he does not have an advantage, but a race beyond that length, it would be considered an advantage. And so I think there's a lot of science that has to go into making these determinations of whether it's uh, whether competition is equitable or not.
Right, exactly. So in a perfect world, what would a like a unified Olympics look like? Do you think that there is a need for more of a combination of the Olympics and Paralympic games, or I don't know, how do you see that the separation? So I feel like one of the things that I notice is people get really excited for the Olympics and they hyperfixate on the Olympics for 2 weeks and then they get like kind of tired by it. And then now there's a week that goes by as they're making changes to the surroundings to make it actually more accessible. And then the momentum is kind of gone. And so I
Mhm.
know that things are changing. Obviously, there was, I think last Summer Olympics was the highest number of people watching the Paralympics. And so I know that it's getting better, but that momentum is just kind
Yeah.
of
It would be really cool? I mean, I have no idea if this would work, but, we have the traditional games and then we have the Paralympics. And the Paralympics are called the Paralympics because they're parallel to the other Olympic Games, right? So you have two lines that are moving in the same direction but not connected. What if there was a bridge event in between that created
yes.
that unified sport competition so that all three can be true? Right? We can have the traditional games, we could have a bridge game, and then we could have the Paralympics, and that would allow athletes to compete in various ways. I mean, in the Paralympics, there are able-bodied athletes, there are athletes that do not have differences. For instance, in soccer, the goalies are cited. In some of the cycling events, there'll be an athlete uh, that has a disability paired with an athlete that doesn't have a disability on a tandem bike. And so there are sports where there are athletes without disabilities competing in the Paralympics. And so that already kind of happens. And so, if there were an opportunity to create this bridge event for a more unified, and it may not be every sport, you may just pick a few sports, but that bridge could then keep the viewership and the excitement up also. So there isn't this lull, and then try to get people back in.
I love that idea. All right. Well, that's
Let's
the
do it.
dream world. That's the dream world. We'll try to make it happen. Let's try to make it happen.
Awesome.
All right. Anything else about the Olympics this week?
No, I'm excited to start watching some skating. I haven't watched much skating. It's always interesting to see what people are busting out for skating. I like it when people challenge the norms, when they push against what is considered to be expected in their sport and try something different. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to the more border cross. I was on the edge of my seat all last night watching that recap. You need to watch it. It's
Okay,
so fun.
I'm definitely gonna watch it now. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't think the women's has happened yet. I don't think so. So I'm gonna
Or
go
maybe it's
find it.
been like just like the quarter or like the
They do it all in one day, Whitney. They do it all in one day. And so
oh
that's the
god.
other thing is like you are in it. Like, you start off and then they're narrowing it down, narrowing it down, narrowing it down. So you might do, I think it's maybe 5 races in a day if you make it to finals.
Wow.
Which is so cool too. And the other thing that's so cool is that it's not a timed event. It's the first 2 to cross the line. So conditions will vary. So like watching the moguls yesterday, the fastest paced skiers were held to the end, right? So they seat you accordingly. And then by the end, the conditions had changed. The visibility was low. The snow was getting slower. And so it was a disadvantage for those skiers. But with the border cross was shooting everyone off at once, and you're only competing against those 4. The top 2 to cross are moving on. And so it creates this really equalized plane. One other thing about border cross that got my goat. Because I am a snowboarder and I snowboard goofy, I was watching to see the representation and the impact of being goofy in a field of regular stance boarders. The ratio is like 70 to 30, right? About 30% of boarders ride goofy and about 70% ride regular. But on this course, and I haven't done research beyond this course. This is just my cursory glance at this concept. 100% of the 8 athletes who advanced to the final were regular. And I think of the 16 that made it to the quarters, only 2, 1 or 2, were goofy. And so that tells me there's a disadvantage, that course somehow creates a disadvantage for athletes who are riding goofy. And it might not be the lay of the course itself, but it may be the vision, like the way you're facing and who you can see. And so if your visual field is such that you can see everyone, that is an advantage to someone who's facing the other direction, whose visual field is more limited. But anyhow, I
That's
thought it was
wondering, like, do they put the riders in order so that like
no, they just shoot you off, and then because they're changing order, you're not in the lane, so you're just
right.
you're in a chute to start, and then you come out, and it's just an open course, and you can come and go. But when you watch, you'll see there were 2 collisions where a U.S. rider was disqualified because his board clipped the tail of another rider, and then that rider got off track and couldn't compete. The U.S. athlete went on to finish his heat in first place, but was disqualified. So the number 2 and 3 actually advanced. So that was super interesting. I can't remember with that collision. I think the guy who got clipped was goofy and the guy who clipped was regular.
Ugh,
So it's just interesting, the stance. And it would only occur in border cross because it's the only time you're on the hill together with other athletes.
exactly. Well, and it just reminds me of like what is like fair in certain sports. Like I was watching the what is like the Super G, what is that called?
Huh?
The
The Super G?
really big downhill race. And so the athletes who go, there's a lot of these blind turns, I guess, and you don't get access to the hill before you actually compete. You get one chance. And
Mhm.
so the athletes who go first have no idea where they're going. And then the athletes who compete later, they get all of this information about, all right, how did other people make errors along the track? And
Mhm.
so they have this major advantage even though they've never done the course, versus in the snowboarding half pipe, it was what's your best score out of 3 times? You get to try
Mhm.
3 times. What's your best score out of 3? And so like what makes it like the rules of the game
Right.
are different in different events.
Right. That came up in moguls yesterday. I was watching the men's mogul final, and moguls are judged on 4 factors. I'm not going to be able to remember them all, but it's like turns, time, jump, and something else. And you get a score. And an Australian one beat out, I think it was a Canadian, and the thing was is their scores were exactly the same. But in the case of a tie, the person with the higher score for turns, meaning his actual performance in the bumps. He won because he had a higher score. A tie went to the person with a higher turn score.
Wow.
I mean, like, can you imagine, like, you're watching the scores come up and it was like an 88.17 or something. I'm making that up, but it's like an 88 point something. And they both had the exact same score. But then it's just whose knees were tighter in the turns that
My
got promoted.
gosh. Wow.
And so that's a whole nother, like, that, like, I love sports that don't have
Yep.
a judging element, because
Having just an
it takes the
objective
bias out.
measure. Yeah,
Yeah.
an objective measure versus a subjective measure. And it's interesting that there's these certain sports that have both objective and subjective things
Mhm.
kind of put together into the final score.
Yeah, ice skating does the same thing because they use, like, a difficulty score, and so then they, they have that as as part of the equation of what they actually score.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah,
interesting.
and I know there's been controversy in the past about the scores, the subjective scores, in at least figure skating for
Mhm,
sure, previously. And so I think that they because they take out, same thing with diving, they take out the highest score and the lowest score, and they do like the average
mhm.
of the middle scores, which is still,
I mean,
there's still
it does remove a little of that bias, but I mean, anytime it's subjective, you're gonna have bias. You're gonna have what type of what stylistically you prefer as the judge. You're
exactly.
watching to see what you prefer.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
It's
Oh my
interesting.
goodness. Okay. Well,
Well, that was fun.
yeah, I know. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about Olympic stuff with me. I love the Olympics.
I'll be back.
All right. Amazing.
Bye.